Hello, and welcome back to Baby Elias's stories. We now return to Bonnie by Iris Johansen. Chapter 7. Forgive me, Father, for I've sinned. It's been 6 weeks since my last confession. Ted Danner closed his eyes as he bowed his head in the confessional. It wasn't my fault, Father. I did what I should have done when a demon tries to do evil. You've always told me I have to fight the demons, he added bitterly. I know you meant the demons inside me, but I can't win those battles. But even if you don't believe me, there are other demons, and I can sometimes win over them. He could feel the tears well to his eyes. What else could I do? It was a wicked demon, and I had to strike out before it devoured John, Father Barnabas. It had teeth that were sharp as knives. He swallowed as he remembered the blood gushing from Jacob's as his knife went into his chest. I've tried so hard to hide from them, but I'd warned these demons. But I'd warned this demon that he mustn't do evil. I did warn him, Father. I know how you fought them, Ted. Father Barnabas paused before asking. Just how did you strike out? I don't remember. It was not the truth, and he'd have to confess that the next time he came to confession. Lying was only a small sin, but he couldn't tell the priest what the demon had forced him to do. Father Barnabas was the only one who could save him, and this sin was too great to forgive. He might not intercede for him, and he'd be left to burn in hell. That couldn't happen. God listened to priests. Forgive me, Father. It wasn't my fault. I left him alone for years, but I couldn't do it any longer. It would have destroyed me. Only God can destroy you, Ted. Another pause. I haven't seen you for weeks. I've told you before that the confessional is important for you. You need it. I know, but I've been good, Father. My thoughts have been pure. I've done good deeds. I've tried to make amends for my sins. I know I shouldn't have missed confession, he whispered, nor have fought the demon. Give me a penance. Make me clean again. If you don't remember what you did, how can I know what penance to give you? Think. Tell me, Ted. He could feel himself being swayed by the priest's persuasiveness, as he always was whenever he was near him. All Father Barnabas had to do was stare into his eyes with that look that seemed to have almost hypnotic power. And Ted wanted to do anything, give anything. I told you I can't do that. Why do you keep asking me? He could feel the rage rising in him, and he had to control it. He had to remember that Father Barnabas wasn't one of the demons. He was Danner's salvation. The priest told him so all the time. And God cast out Lucifer. He knew how evil demons can be. He would forgive me. You have to forgive me too. Ted, it's not up to me. It's in God's hands. Let's pray and ask him for forgiveness. He doesn't listen to me. His voice was tense with anger. Why should he? You're the one who has to get him to forgive me. I couldn't help it. It was like a giant wave of flame that was drowning me. I couldn't see, I couldn't feel anything but the searing of the... He should have stopped me. I didn't want to hurt them. Them? Father Barnabas asked slowly. More than one demon. Alligators swarming in the dirty brown pond. A dark-haired woman, beautiful as a Delilah from Hades, staring fiercely up at him as he had brought the knife down. Not really demons, but he couldn't accept that rage, not vengeance, could make him do anything so horrible. If he did, then he'd be beyond all forgiveness. I don't remember. I think you do, Ted. No, he wouldn't remember. Why did the priest keep telling him to remember when it hurt him to do it? Was Father Barnabas his enemy too? No, that couldn't be true. Control these thoughts. Change the subject to the reason he was here. He forced a smile. I'll try to come here more often, Father. I promise. But I need you to help me now. Did you do what I asked? Of course I did. He tensed. Then tell me what I need to know. The priest shook his head. Danner's hands clenched. I prayed, Father Barnabas said gently. I don't always get an immediate answer. Sometimes I don't get the answer you want. Danner could feel the rage rising within him. But you're a priest, damn it! God won't listen to me. But he'll listen to you. I have to know. What does she want? What does the little girl want from me? Perhaps if you told me a little more, we could work through this. Who is this little girl? I don't want to work through anything. Just tell me what she wants so that I can give it to her. She won't leave me alone until I do. I'll pray again, but I can't promise. Perhaps you could talk to her yourself, or perhaps her parents. Talk to her? Panic was causing his heart to pound. No, I can't talk to her. You have to do it. He jumped to his feet. I'll give you more time, but you have to help me. Don't tell me you can't do it. You can do anything. You always say you want to help me. This is the only way you can do it. I trust you, Father. Try again. Help me. Ted, talk to me. Not about this little girl if you don't want me to ask questions about her. Tell me what else you've been doing. If he talked to the priest, he would be at his mercy as he had been all through the years. Danner could feel his frustration begin to turn to rage. Calm. Don't turn on the only man who could help him. Don't let loose the rage. Resist the temptation to step into the cubicle that had heard a million sins and kill the priest. That would truly make him one of the demons that were his enemies. Ted, just pray and find out what I need, Danner said hoarsely, and give me forgiveness. If you were in the right, why would you need forgiveness? Why did the priest keep asking him questions? Kill him. No, that was the demon whispering. He couldn't listen. He jumped to his feet. I have to go. Goodbye, Father. Don't go. Come back to my office. You need me, Ted. Dear God, he did need him, but he was past the help the priest could give him except for this last request. I have to go, he said jerkily as he left the confessional. Don't fail me again. Ted! Danner ignored Father Barnabas' shout as he ran out of the church and down the stone steps. He shouldn't have come. He was hurting, and Father Barnabas had not been able to heal him. No, that was not true. The priest could do anything. His powers were without limit. He had not wanted to heal him. He had only wanted to tear aside the scabs of Danner's wounds and watch him bleed, as his hand had bled when John's knife entered it. He looked down at his bandaged hand, and the tears stung his eyes once more. Pain, broken bones. Not John's fault. John would never hurt him. He must have demons whispering in his ear too. Catherine Ling, the Delilah. He had recognized that quality in her when he'd first seen her earlier that night at the casino, when she and John had taken Jacobs captive. Beautiful, exotic, a sorceress weaving her spell. A sorceress weaving her spell. As John and the woman had hunted down Jacobs, so had Dana followed and stalked them, waiting for his chance. He had watched, listened, finding out what he could about her. He had thought that perhaps she could be spared, that she was only a temptress that John was using for pleasure. Then later, when she'd been stalking him at the bayou, he'd known that she had to be destroyed. He cradled his torn, broken hand. He'd have to change bandages soon. He had taught John how to throw that knife with deadly accuracy at the cabin in Wisconsin when John was only a boy. They had laughed and made bets, and for a little while Ted had felt whole again. Not John's fault. It was the demon. It was Delilah. He was gone. Father Barnabas stood on the top step and gazed out in frustration at the empty street. He should have been quicker. He should have sensed how close Ted Danner was to breaking and running. He had been concentrating on how to tear through the wall around Danner and reaching him, and had not realized how tightly the man was balanced. And he knew how dangerous Danner could be when he was upset like this. Before he had been able to control him, and he had thought that when Danner had come to him pleading for help with the child, he could lure him back to him. What had set him off this time? Well, he wasn't about to find out anytime soon, unless he was able to give him what he wanted. He had become the enemy to Danner. He had felt the vibrations, the guilt, the searing rage that was fueling the man. He had been bracing himself for possible attack. Danner was changing, becoming dangerous. Could he be controlled? Could he control him? Control was of the utmost importance with Danner. He could do it. He had done it before, through the years. All it took was perseverance and subtle manipulation. Danner regarded him as the only light to overcome the darkness that was trying to take over his soul. As long as he kept thinking that was true, the control would be rock solid. "This is a far cry from a VA hospital," Eve said as Gallo pulled into the parking lot of the San Antonio Medical Center. It was a small brick and glass building that appeared sleek, modern, and affluent. The lot was occupied by a BMW, a gray Lexus, and a small red sports car. The neighborhood in which the medical center was located had the same air of prosperity as those luxury vehicles. "It seems Dr. Temple has moved up in the world." "Or down," Gallo said grimly. "It depends on who you ask. I've met a couple of doctors who take care of servicemen, and there are none better." "Everyone has a right to improve their lot in life," she said as she got out of the car. "It's the capitalist system. You defend it, but how much do you charge for your forensic reconstructions?" "Enough to make a living." She waited for him at the plate glass door. "I'm no martyr, John. I can't be." "Excuse me." A tall, tanned man in his early 50s had come out of the door. He was dressed in white shorts and t-shirt and gave Eve a dazzling smile. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" He jumped into the red sports car and the next minute had roared out of the parking lot. "Dr. Temple, I couldn't reach..." The blonde woman in a nurse's uniform had run out of the building and was staring in exasperation at the sports car disappearing down the block. "Damn it to hell!" "That was Dr. Temple?" Gallo asked. "We need to see him." He glanced at the badge on her uniform. "Miss Dobler?" "Stand in line," the nurse said sourly. "He's booked solid for the rest of the day." Then she forced a smile. "He had an emergency, and I've had to cancel everything for the afternoon. I couldn't reach his noon appointment, and I was trying to tell him before he left. If you'll come inside, I'll try to set you up for tomorrow." "Emergency?" Eve repeated. "He didn't look as if he was rushing off to the hospital." "I can't help how it looked," she said shortly. "Dr. Temple told me it was an emergency. Would you like to make an appointment or not? He had a golf bag in that sports car, Gallo said. Does he play at a local country club? She started to nod, then repeated. It was an emergency. Excuse me, I have to go back inside and phone him. She turned and went back into the medical center. What a charming man, Eve murmured ironically. It's a beautiful day and he ditches all his patients and takes off. She headed back to the car. But I've no intention of waiting around to see him tomorrow. I'll check out all the country clubs in this general area on the computer, then start calling. I'd bet it's not too far from the medical center. He impressed me as a man who wouldn't want business to interfere with pleasure. 20 minutes later, she turned to Gallo and handed him the number she'd scrawled on a notepad. Diaz Country Club. It's near the river, about a 15-minute drive. Right. Gallo started the car. You did the search, now I'll do the interrogation, okay? I'll see when we get there. She was thinking of what Gallo had told her. When did Temple leave his job at the VA hospital? 3 months after he signed the death certificate for my uncle. What a coincidence. How convenient. And then he came here and settled down in the lap of luxury. A payoff? Look, my uncle had no money. He couldn't have even had treatment if it weren't paid for by the government. But Nate Quinn and Thomas Jacobs had money to burn with all the drugs and smuggling they were doing. And Ted Danner had some connection to them, or he wouldn't have killed Jacobs. She glanced at him. So we have to look for that connection, John. He shook his head. Uncle Ted wouldn't have. He stopped. Okay, I'm in denial, but it doesn't make sense. It didn't make sense to Eve either, but that didn't mean it wasn't true. Then prove me wrong. Heaven knows that I feel like I'm walking through a maze. I'm just trying to follow the trail and hope I get back, and hope I get a break. Dr. Temple, Eve asked, could we have a moment? No, can't you see I'm busy? Lawrence Temple frowned as he glanced up at Gallo and Eve, who had pulled up in a golf cart next to where he was teeing off. He looked down at his ball again. Who told you where to find me? Then he glanced back at Eve. Didn't I see you at my office? Badly. You were in a hurry. Make an appointment. I don't think so, Gallo said. We're in a hurry. Answer our questions and we won't bother you again. I want to know about a patient, Ted Danner, you had at the Atlanta VA Medical Center shortly before you came here. Temple stiffened warily. I don't have time for past history. Please leave or I'll call security. That might not be a good idea. Falsifying a death certificate is a criminal offense. Your new patients might not appreciate being treated by a doctor who might be picked up by the police at any time. Bingo, Eve thought. Temple had turned a little pale beneath that golden tan, but he recovered quickly. I don't know what you're talking about. I'd caution you not to risk a lawsuit by this nonsense. I know how to protect myself. I imagine you do, Gallo said softly. But I have no intention of bothering with bringing you up on charges. I don't have time. I think we'll just go to my car and have a discussion. Then, if I like your answers, I'll let you walk away. Temple moistened his lips. I'm not going anywhere with you. Who are you anyway? John Gallo. Theodore Danner is my uncle. Was, Temple said. He died of pneumonia. I regret your loss, Mr. Gallo. My uncle was seen in Louisiana only yesterday. We verified his fingerprints, which means that you're in trouble, Temple. That's not possible. Temple was no longer pale, but flushed with anger. It's some sort of a mistake. You can't pin anything on me. I'm not going to argue with you, Gallo said softly as he crossed to stand before Temple. I'm only going to listen to you. I'm very angry, you know. I loved my uncle, and I have an idea he was victimized. You can either prove you weren't the one who did it, or face the consequences. He stared him in the eye. You're a doctor. You know how easy it is to cause a massive hemorrhage if you know what you're doing. I do know what I'm doing. It would take me less than 15 seconds. It's broad daylight, Temple said hoarsely. There are people all over the green. You wouldn't do it. 15 seconds, and no one is noticing anything but their own games. I'd put you in that golf cart and just walk away. He took a step closer. Look at me, then tell me I wouldn't do it. Eve inhaled sharply as she looked at his expression. She had only seen that raw ferocity once before in Gallo, and it was truly intimidating. Temple jerked his gaze away. You asshole! I think you'd do anything. Get in that cart, Eve, Gallo said. You drive us to the parking lot, and I'll sit in back with Dr. Temple. You're going to let him do this? Temple asked Eve. It's kidnapping, you know. No, it's an invitation to join us in our car for a drive and have a discussion, Eve said as she got in the cart. Anything else is entirely in your court. Temple hesitated, then moved jerkily toward the cart. It's all a mistake. I'm innocent of any wrongdoing. Pat phrase. You sound like you're in a court of law already, Gallo said. You can't prove anything. Temple got into the cart. And Danner would be a fool to testify that I was guilty of anything. He'd be convicting himself. They came to me. He was supposed to just disappear, damn it. You may be right. Gallo got into the cart. You may not be worth our while. We'll take a little drive along the river, and you can convince us. Let me out of here, and I'll forget this ever happened, Temple said as they cruised by the river 30 minutes later. He turned to Gallo, who was sitting next to him in the back seat. I have a decent amount of money. We can make a deal. I believe you've already made a deal, Eve said over her shoulder from the driver's seat. Who approached you? Danner himself? He hesitated. Look, I can't talk about this. I was warned that it could mean... He broke off. I didn't do anything to harm anyone. I just signed the damn death certificate. Nobody cared whether Danner lived or died. I cared, Gallo said. Who paid you off? Temple was silent. You wouldn't really cause a stir and tell everyone that I committed a crime? That would be awkward for me. I have a reputation here. Eve couldn't believe it. Temple was sitting next to Gallo, who was angry and probably the most dangerous man he had ever met, and he was worried about his reputation. Either his vision or his priorities were seriously awry. We don't care about your reputation, Temple. Give us answers, and you just might survive to play another golf game. He frowned. Golf is important. It's not only a game, it's a way to cement my status in the community. I realized as soon as I got here that an affluent practice could be just a stepping stone to get me where I want to be. I have a chance to run for lieutenant governor next year. He gazed warily at Gallo. You can see that I can't let you libel me. Talk to me, Gallo said. Who gave you the money to declare my uncle dead? He hesitated. You'll protect me? It's not as if I did anything really wrong. Gallo put his hand on Temple's throat and squeezed. Talk! Temple gasped, and Eve could tell that the lethal danger of the situation had finally become real to him. You're crazy. Jacobs told me that this wouldn't happen. He said nobody cared about Danner. Then you should have asked him why he was trying to cover his tracks. Gallo's grasp loosened. It was Thomas Jacobs. How? Why? I don't know why. It didn't matter to me, he added bitterly. Just because I was near the bottom of my class at med school, I was stuck in that hospital treating a bunch of vets. Do you know how much I made there? Guys I went to school with had jobs on Easy Street. I deserved better. Those vets deserved better, Eve said. I'm beginning to be glad Jacobs bribed you out of there. Jacobs didn't mention why he wanted Danner declared dead? Gallo asked. Temple shook his head. He just said he wasn't important, and no one would follow up if there was a certificate that stated Danner was dead. He was a patient at the hospital? You were his doctor? No, he had been discharged after he'd been treated for pneumonia. I'd never met him. His hands clenched. At first I thought maybe Jacobs had helped Danner to cross to the other side because of insurance or something. I was scared I'd be an accomplice, but I checked the hospital records and Danner didn't have insurance, so I thought it was safe to take Jacob's money. Pretty flimsy, Gallo said. There are other reasons than money to kill a man. I wanted that money. I had to have the money. It was my chance. So you scrawled your name and took the cash. I didn't hurt Danner. I didn't hurt anyone. Jacobs promised me that Danner was safe, and he just wanted to disappear. He said it was sort of like the witness protection program. After all, Danner was an ex-ranger. It could have been true. And you didn't give a damn if it was or not. No, his lips curled. But if Danner's still alive, as you said, then maybe Jacobs was being upfront about it after all. Go find Jacobs and ask him. I found him. So did Danner. Jacobs ended up with a knife in his chest. Oh, shit. Temple moistened his lips. That's not good. Yes, it might interfere with your political plans. Temple recovered immediately. You can't prove I had anything to do with it. Jacobs paid me in cash and told me that it wouldn't be smart for me to mention his name again. I never saw him after that. Why would I? I had what I wanted. But maybe you wanted to eliminate a possible roadblock in your political plans, Eve suggested. The police might be interested in your... No! His chest was rising and falling. You can't do this to me. I never saw Jacobs after the night he gave me the money. Eve was not sure that they hadn't plumbed the extent of Temple's knowledge. You said you checked the hospital records. Was there anything in them that... I was only checking for insurance. I didn't care about anything else. I've told you everything I know. His teeth bit into his lower lip. Jacobs is really dead? Very. Did Jacobs tell you where this witness protection program was going to send Danner? I didn't ask. Of course you didn't. You wanted to erase him from your mind. Just a signature, then off you went. No forwarding address in Danner's records? No. It was like pulling teeth. Who were his doctors at the hospital? That was years ago. You expect me to remember? I didn't care who was treating him. Probably some loser. What difference does it make to you? He'd been released. But he might have kept in contact with his doctor or nurse if they had developed a relationship. With our caseloads, we didn't have time to develop relationship. We didn't have time to develop relationships. We had to get them in and out. At least that had been Temple's philosophy, Eve thought. Nothing struck you as unusual in his records. He shook his head. I keep telling you, it didn't matter. He was just another vet. None of them mattered. And it didn't matter that those vets had given their bodies and lives to keep parasites like this walking the earth, she thought bitterly. She didn't know how Gallo was keeping his temper. He had spent 7 years in that prison in Korea because he thought it was his duty as a soldier to protect his country. Pull over, Eve, Gallo said softly. Temple and I need to take a walk together. Her gaze flew to his reflection in the rear-view mirror. He was not keeping his temper as she had thought, she realized. His dark eyes were glittering in his taut face. Shit. I'll pull over, she said. But Temple is the only one who takes a walk. We're through with him, and I won't let him interfere with what we have to do. Gazzo's gaze never left Temple's face. He wouldn't interfere. I'd be very quick. No, John. He's scum, and I'm not letting you leave a trail of bodies behind us. He's not worth it. I agree. That's why we should take a walk. Body? Temple's eyes had widened in alarm. You're talking about killing me? Why, I only told you the truth. Everyone knows that you... Shut up. Eve pulled to the side of the road. Get out and get moving. Temple scrambled out of the car. I'm going. Keep him away from me. He took off at a trot. Think about it. No one has to know about that past history. Name your price. He saw Gallo get out of the car. Anything you want, he said, panicked as he started to run. Money is what it's all about. Everyone knows that. Eve saw that Gallo's muscles were tense. and his gaze was fixed on the fleeing Temple. He was very close to having that tension explode into action. "Don't go after him," she said quietly. "Get in the car, John." "He's a weasel," Gallo said tightly. "But sometimes weasels can be dangerous when they're in the right position. How careful do you think he was when he was a resident at that hospital? Those guys were helpless, and they deserved someone to tend to them who would at least give them adequate care. Hell, they should have let those patients keep their guns before they turned doctors like Temple loose on them. Hell, they should have let those patients keep their guns before they turned doctors like Temple loose on them. He's not in that position any longer. I'm sure there are good doctors at that hospital too." Distract him quickly. "We have to find out who treated your uncle and see if we can get a lead. Is there anyone else you can think of who might know anything about him? You once mentioned to me he was engaged at one time." "She married someone else when he was overseas, and he never saw her again." "You're sure?" He shook his head. "I would have said yes if you'd asked me that a few days ago. I'm not sure of anything about him any longer." "Did he have any close friends?" "No. He was pretty much of a loner. Occasionally, one of his army buddies would come to town, and he'd go out for a drink. One of them might still know something. Get in the car and make a list of the ones who you remember." His glance shifted back to Temple, who was still running and was almost out of sight. "You're trying to throw a red herring in front of me." "Yes, but it's a necessary red herring." He glanced back at her. "Catherine would have let me take him down." "Would she? I don't believe you know her well enough to assume that." But Catherine might have understood that black and white philosophy, where evil was instantly punished. She had lived in the same deadly world as Gallo. "At any rate, Catherine and I are different in that respect. Get in the car, John." He gave one last glance at Temple and turned away. "We didn't find out as much as I hoped from him." He got into the car. Other than it was Jacobs, who was the payoff man. Jacobs often did the dirty work when he and Quinn needed a job done. But how the hell did Uncle Ted become involved with Jacobs? Eve shrugged. "I have no idea, and we may not know until we catch up with Ted Danner. So why don't you start making a list of possible people your uncle might have contacted?" "I don't think it will do much good." He took her computer, opened a document, and started to type. "But I'll try to remember." She reached for her phone. "And I'll try to get in touch with Catherine and see if she's managed to tap into the hospital records." "I'm at the records office now," Catherine said when she picked up Eve's call. "Joe and I just got here. Venable was having trouble accessing records because the confidential aspect is sometimes doubled at a VA hospital. Some of these guys were special ops, and it's best that no one gives Al-Qaeda a chance to ID who they are. They always have bullseyes painted on them." "But you think you'll be able to get them?" "I'll get them. Give me another 20 minutes. The records clerk isn't a bad guy. He's just careful." "What do you want to know?" "Temple was a bust. The only information he could give us was that Jacobs was the one who paid him for falsifying the records. He doesn't know why. He also has no idea where Danner is now. We're looking for any contacts we can find who will give us a lead. Nurses, doctors, therapists." "I'll see what I can do." Catherine paused. "What did Gallo say when you told him that Danner was definitely alive and raising general hell?" "What would you say if the only person you'd loved from the time you were a kid was turning out like this? Denial, bewilderment, even guilt toward you because he couldn't force himself to kill Danner when he threw that knife." "Idiot. He stopped him, didn't he? That's all that's important. I'll call you when I get through these records." Catherine hung up and turned to Joe. "Temple told them that Jacobs was the payoff man for the bogus death certificate. No other information. They want to see if we can find a possible contact with someone in the hospital who could tell us where Danner is now." "Then let's get going," Joe said as he gestured to the clerk sitting at his desk across the room. "Work some magic, Catherine." "No magic needed," she said. Sincerity is the key word here. You could do it as well as I could. I beg to differ, Joe said dryly. He might give in and give me what we want eventually, but not in 20 minutes as you promised, Eve, unless I got rough with him. But persuasion is always better, and you garnish persuasion with a certain glamour that makes it more palatable. She suddenly whirled on him. Glamour? She repeated. Bullshit. I hate it when you or anyone else assumes that I try to use seduction as the answer to every problem. I'm not a whore. I use my brains, not my body, to do my job. Phew, I didn't mean to cause an explosion. Joe's smile faded. I know you're not a whore, Catherine. I never meant to suggest anything like that. But I also know that you're not too stupid to know what your effect is on the male population. It's all one package. I've known that from the beginning. Eve thinks that it would offend your independence to ever use the fact that you're a gorgeous woman to shift the balance in a fight. I told her I didn't agree. It's just another weapon that you have in your arsenal. You prefer not to use it, but you wouldn't discount it if it came to life or death. You're a survivor, like me, and you're a very practical woman. She shouldn't have lost her temper. That outburst had come out of nowhere. It had been a rough few weeks, and she was feeling ragged and frustrated. Yes, I am, she met his gaze. I have to live. I have a son, Luke, to support and try to give a decent life. Would I do anything in the world to keep him safe? Would I do anything in the world to keep him safe? You bet I would. I'd steal or whore or kill. But you have to choose what's important enough to you to blow all the barriers. So far, I've only found one, Luke. She smiled faintly. And you found Eve. Yeah, I'm like you, Joe. She moved toward the clerk. And you're right. If necessary, I'll use the fact that men can be persuaded to give me what I want just on the chance they might get a chance to jump me. So let's get that information and call Eve back. Providence, Georgia. The sun was going down over the great canyon in a burst of glory. Light and beauty were all around Danner, but he could only see blackness. Despair was washing over him in a great wave. He had come rushing back from seeing Father Barnabas to assure himself that he could still be saved. But even in this place, there was no solace. The darkness was creeping toward him, over hills, through the trees, blocking out the light. You're wrong, Ted. The light is still here. You're just not seeing it. He stiffened and whirled toward the hillside. The little girl in the Bugs Bunny t-shirt, her red hair blazing in the failing light, stood there staring at him. No! He whirled and ran away from her, stumbling, falling, picking himself up and running again. His heart was beating so hard it was hurting him. He had to get away from her. Why had she come? To torment him? To tell him that there were more demons for him to fight? Ted. She was following him. He wouldn't look at her. Go away! His voice cracked as he tried to control it. I'll do what you want. Give you anything. Just go away. He knew she was speaking, but he closed her out as he ran through the hills. Get away from her. Get away from the darkness. Go back to the world and do her bidding. Go back to the priest and force him to find out what he needed to know. Go back and kill the demons.